Greetings! This is the Mad Hermit with you once again. And today we're going to do a book review. And basically the premise of the book is this. What if Jesus Christ got into a conversation with Buddha? What would these two figures say to each other if they ever sat down and talked with each other? I'm pretty sure many people throughout the ages and around the world wondered that. I'm pretty sure it'll be very interesting conversations to drop in and listen to. But you know what? Someone actually written a book based on that scenario. And this is the book that I'm going to be reviewing today. It's entitled The Lotus and The Cross by Ravi Zacharias. Jesus Talks with Buddha. Overall, this is a very engaging book. It's a wonderful book. It's a very short book. Given the size of this book, you can tell it's a very small and a very thin book. And actually, it's less than 100 pages long. And the premise is very simple. It's basically, at first, begins with this Indian woman named Priya, whose body is ravaged by AIDS, and who ends up getting onto a boat with Jesus and Buddha. And basically, from that point on, she acts almost as an observer between them as they have a conversation. And likewise, she would once in a while ask questions and have dialogue between these two major figures, namely about why there's so much suffering in the world, why is she infected with AIDS, all the tough, pressing questions that everyone in the world has, just straight out put on the table between Buddha and Jesus, and they both discuss these things and answer likewise in their own way. This is a very engaging book. I was totally absorbed into this book. I could not put this book down. And basically this book was written by Ravi Zacharias, as you could see here. And essentially he is a Christian writer. Now some of you might wonder that whether or not because of that this book has a certain bias, or whether or not this book has been lightly researched only on the Buddhist side. But basically Ravi Zacharias is not only a very learned man, but in order for him to research this book, just as a side note, Ravi Zacharias spent hours upon hours at a time in Buddhist temples, speaking and carrying dialogue with many Buddhist priests, many Buddhist monks, and holding tea, so to speak, and conversations with many students of Buddhism. In addition to that, he comes from an Indian background, and because of that, he grows up with some background knowledge automatically on Buddhism and Eastern religions. And plus, in addition to this, actually, I'm going to tell you an interesting story. I actually lent out this book to a friend of mine, and she comes from a Buddhist background. And during the time that I lent out this book to her, 2 Buddhist priests were actually living with her family. And her family were also from a Buddhist background. They were also Buddhist, actually. And one of the priests one day picked up this book and read through it. And the priest basically said it was very engaging and was very interesting. So some of you Buddhists out there or non-Christians out there who might be quick to accuse that, oh, this book, because it's a Christian writer, it must be propaganda, it's biased, it's trash. Well, if a Buddhist priest looked at this book, read through it, and found it engaging and interesting, I'm pretty sure that you too can find it engaging and interesting if you open your mind up to it. It's a very well-written book. The language is simple. It treats both figures with respect, and it basically asks all the tough questions that everyone in the world asks, Christian or non-Christian. And if you ever wonder, if your mind is open to imagine, if your mind is open to learn more about these two religions and the differences between them, this is the book for you. If I was to assign this book a star scale, I would give it 5 stars out of 5. It's a wonderful read. You'll probably finish it within less than a day, probably less than maybe 2 hours even, depending how fast you read, and it's very absorbing. And again, when I read this, I could not put this book down. Again, this is The Lotus and The Cross, written by Ravi Zacharias. Jesus Talks with Buddha. It's available at every major bookstore, Borders, Barnes & Nobles, and Amazon. And this has been The Mad Hermit. I am signing out. Happy reading.